Hi, I'm Steve Nikolovsky, the State Inspector, Asbestos and Demolition Services, Safe Work New South Wales.
And I'm Jason Wall, the Assistant State Inspector. Thanks for taking the time to join us. Today we're going to discuss best practice for undertaking clearance inspections and issuing of clearance certificates. Air monitoring, clearance inspections and clearance certificates must only be undertaken by an existing licensed asbestos assessor, or LAAs as I will now refer to them. A person deemed competent or an LAA can undertake non-friable clearance inspections and issue clearance certificates.
This webinar is suitable for all our existing LAAs and competent persons, and also for those who want to become an asbestos assessor. So for existing LAAs, you may already be familiar with the majority of the content, but please stay with us. It only goes for about 15 minutes, and we are going to discuss some important pieces of information that we want all our LAAs to be across. If you have people working with you who want to become LAAs, then please encourage them to watch it, as it will greatly assist them in ensuring they gather and demonstrate sufficient evidence of experience to submit with their applications.
Today we're going to discuss best practice for undertaking clearance inspections and the issuing of clearance certificates. So what will we cover today is the laws around clearance inspections and issuing of clearance certificates. Who is deemed competent to undertake clearance certificates? Our expectations when undertaking clearance inspections, when not to issue a clearance certificate, and some case studies. The first step after licensed asbestos removal work is completed and before any other work is commenced, a clearance inspection must be undertaken and a clearance certificate issued. This means before any asbestos removal controls have been removed and non-asbestos removal work takes place, the clearance inspection must be undertaken. Example, demolition of a residence prior to the demolition works commencing, whether by hand or mechanical means.
The clearance inspection must be a visual inspection for evidence of dust and debris that includes all of the asbestos removal area, as outlined in the Asbestos Removal Control Plan, including surfaces where asbestos-containing material was removed from, horizontal surfaces below the removal area, and any waste routes. It should also make note of any removed ACM left on site that was not disposed of after the removal was completed. It is important to note that removed ACM should only be left on site in exceptional circumstances. For example, due to access issues, where the only way to get it out of the site is to demolish the house. If there is no valid reason the asbestos has not been removed, then the clearance inspection should not be done until the ACM is removed from the site.
Even if there are still small known quantities of ACMs that can't be accessed until demolition takes place, the clearance inspection must be undertaken. For example, ACM packers under bearers, ACM wall sheeting which has been sandwiched between studs, things like that. These known or suspected ACMs should be identified and noted during the clearance inspection and outlined in the clearance certificate. Where known or suspected ACMs are identified during a clearance inspection that are outside of the Asbestos Removal Control Plan, the clearance certificate should state words to the effect of any other asbestos or ACM that was outside the scope of the works and ARCP does not form part of this clearance inspection. All efforts must be taken to remove all ACM during the asbestos removal in the first instance, if reasonably practical, prior to the inspection.
A clearance inspection following friable asbestos removal requires a slightly different process. These inspections must only be undertaken by an LAA. Clearance air monitoring must be undertaken and forms an additional part to the visual inspection. The removal area or enclosure should be dry prior to the clearance inspection, as minor amounts of residue may be masked by wet surfaces. Particular attention should be paid to ledges, the tops of air conditioning ducts, cracks in the floor, voids in plastic sheeting and crevices, or other areas which may have been overlooked during the initial cleanup. For example, consider a distance of approximately 5 metres from the area immediately surrounding the removal area, enclosure, waste area, and approximately a 5-metre corridor for the transit route.
Once the removal area and its immediate surroundings are free from visual contamination, clearance monitoring may begin. Following clearance monitoring and results being below 0.01 fibres per millilitre of air, the enclosure for the asbestos removal area may be dismantled. A further visual inspection should be conducted to ensure no further contamination has been introduced in the process of dismantling the enclosure. A clearance certificate must only be issued after the enclosure has been dismantled and the independent licensed asbestos assessor is satisfied that the area is safe to be reoccupied.
As stated on the previous slide, a clearance inspection is required at the completion of all licensed asbestos removal work prior to reoccupation. Persons undertaking asbestos clearance inspections must ensure they are independent of the asbestos removal work. This means not undertaking the work and not involved in a business or undertaking that is carrying out the work. If there is a potential perceived conflict of interest, you should consider that they are not independent. This could include relatives, friends, ongoing working relationships.
A person that may be deemed competent to undertake clearance inspections could include being an LAA, an occupational hygienist, an environmental health officer, or a supervisor of another licensed asbestos removal company. The key is to ensure they are independent and meet the training, experience, knowledge and skills requirements. A listing of licensed asbestos assessors can be found on the Safe Work New South Wales website. After a clearance inspection has been completed and the asbestos removal area and the immediate surrounds deemed safe for reoccupation, a clearance certificate must be issued prior to the area being reoccupied, whether that is to continue further demolition or refurbishment works or final handover back to the customer. If air monitoring was required, as is the case for all friable asbestos removal work, then the clearance monitoring results must show levels below the reporting limit of 0.01 fibres per millilitre of air, and those results must accompany the clearance certificate. It is important to note the difference between clearance monitoring, which is air monitoring taken within the removal area following completion of asbestos removal, as opposed to control monitoring, which is air monitoring conducted during removals. It is the clearance monitoring results which are required to meet the requirements of a friable clearance certificate.
The important point prior to issuing the clearance certificate is that the LAA or competent person who undertook the clearance inspection must be satisfied the removal area and surrounds do not pose a risk from exposure to asbestos for anyone who returns to those areas, as asbestos controls will no longer be in place.
Let's start with what sets the bar for our expectations on providing sufficient information in clearance certificates. Date and time inspection undertaken, along with the names of the client for which the work was undertaken, address for the removal work and dates when the removal was carried out, what asbestos removal documentation was reviewed prior to undertaking the inspection, example being the Safe Work notification, asbestos removal control plan, Safe Work method statements, scopes of works, etc. What areas were inspected, including the waste routes? This would include both vertical and horizontal surfaces. Was the removal work consistent with the asbestos removal control plan, notification and scope of work? What did the inspection involve? Visual inspection only. Photographs of the inspected areas confirming removal of the ACM, name and qualifications of the LAA or competent person who undertook the inspection.
The clearance certificate must be provided in writing to the PCBU, client and or owner, occupier, controller of the workplace. It must state the LAA or competent person found no visible asbestos residue from the asbestos removal work in the area or in the vicinity of the area where the work was carried out. If clearance air monitoring was undertaken and levels are below 0.01 fibres per millilitre of air, those results must be provided with the clearance certificate.
We've had issues with clearance certificates being submitted with insufficient information, such as incorrect dates when the inspection was undertaken. If pre-photos were obtained, the post-inspection photos do not depict the same areas inspected. Lack of details around the location inspected or what was involved in the inspection. Missing details like no reference to the licensed removalist details. No recognition of asbestos removal notification, ARCPs, safe work method statements or scopes of work. It is important to ensure that clearance inspection and the details provided in the clearance certificate are comprehensive and provide sufficient evidence that a thorough inspection was undertaken and as a result the area does not pose a risk to exposure to asbestos.
So let's have a look at an example of what we want to see for a clearance certificate to meet the regulation. Our preference is that you use the clearance certificate template which is provided in the How to Safely Remove Asbestos Code of Practice. This will ensure that if completed correctly, all required information will be captured in your clearance certificate. If using your own template, then ensure you are meeting the requirements under Clause 474 of the Work Health and Safety Regulation, and use these words to ensure you demonstrate that you are meeting the minimum requirements.
First, what is in the scope of work if you're being engaged to carry out? This needs to be clearly articulated on the clearance certificate. For example, stating asbestos removal clearance inspection at an address is not enough information. Be specific. List the site address, company name if that's applicable, what was inspected, and details of the asbestos removalist and what exactly you're engaged to do. For example, engaged to conduct a clearance inspection of the removal of AC sheets from internal walls and ceiling linings in the bathroom and laundry, external leaves and gables on the perimeter of the single-storey residence.
We have come across instances where LAAs and competent persons who subcontract to licensed asbestos removalist on a regular basis and as a result have issued a clearance certificate without attending the site and conducting an assessment. If you do this, you are in breach of work health and safety laws, and Safe Work New South Wales will explore all avenues to have the matter prosecuted. If you're an LAA, your licence can also be cancelled and be disqualified from holding an assessor licence in the future. Furthermore, you may be risking exposure to asbestos of persons who may return to the area where asbestos may not have been adequately removed.
That's all we have for you today, so thank you for listening. We hope that the information you received in this webinar has provided some clarity and understanding around minimum requirements for clearance inspections and certificates and why it's so important to adhere to WHS regulations which govern asbestos.
At Safe Work New South Wales, we're always striving to achieve greater consistency in industry standards, improved compliance with work health and safety laws, and a safer environment for our community. As an LAA and competent person, you have a responsibility to carry out work in line with work health and safety laws. The laws are there to help protect the community and aim to prevent inadvertent exposure to asbestos. We appreciate the majority of LAAs and competent persons conduct their work in a professional and compliant manner, so thank you.